February 1916. The world is engulfed in a conflict unlike any before. On the Western Front, a small, fortified French town called Verdun suddenly becomes the focal point of one of the most brutal and iconic battles of the First World War. The German Chief of General Staff, Erich von Falkenhayn, has a plan, one that could change the course of the war. His goal: to crush French morale, to bleed the French army in a relentless struggle, and to force France to surrender through sheer exhaustion. But what begins as a calculated strike quickly spirals into a grinding, months-long battle of attrition that neither side could have fully anticipated. Verdun is no ordinary battlefield. Its network of forts, trenches, and strategic heights makes it both a fortress and a trap. Falkenhayn's initial vision of a swift victory soon collides with the harsh realities of trench warfare, modern artillery, and the unyielding resolve of the French soldiers. As shells rain down and the mud of the battlefield swallows men and machines alike, the struggle transforms into a testament to human endurance, ingenuity, and sacrifice. In this video, we will journey through the strategies, the chaos, and the sheer human drama of Verdun, from the first artillery barrages to the desperate defenses of the French forts. From heroic acts of courage to the tragic toll of industrialized warfare, we will uncover why Verdun became a symbol of resilience and suffering. Before we dive in, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel so you won't miss any of our deep dives into history's most pivotal battles. And trust me, you will want to stay with us until the end to see how this extraordinary clash of wills shaped not just a war, but an entire generation. As the first German shells thundered over Verdun in February 1916, the true scale of the coming nightmare began to reveal itself. Despite its reputation as one of France's most fortified sectors, Verdun's defenses were far from what one might expect for a fortress poised to withstand a full-scale assault. Years of shifting priorities had left many of its forts undermanned, and its artillery spread thin across other fronts, leaving the city vulnerable to the concentrated fury of the German onslaught. Commanders in Paris had made a pragmatic calculation, believing that Verdun's forts, though imposing on maps, were not essential to the larger strategy of the Western Front. Their decision would soon prove to be a critical misjudgment, one that the German High Command was quick to exploit. When the German Fifth Army advanced, their initial movements were careful, almost methodical, designed to probe French lines, identify weak points, and exploit any gap that might present itself. The early hours of the battle revealed the stark consequences of France's underestimated position. Fort Douaumont, the linchpin of Verdun's defensive network, stood largely unprepared for the assault. Its garrison, reduced to a fraction of what it might have been in more fully staffed conditions, faced a relentless German advance armed with overwhelming artillery and carefully coordinated infantry. Within days, the fort fell with astonishing speed, not through a prolonged siege or heroic hand-to-hand combat, but because of the sheer imbalance in preparation and resources. The few French soldiers stationed there, though brave, were simply unable to resist the calculated force arrayed against them, and the fort surrendered without the kind of dramatic resistance that history might have expected. The capture of Douaumont sent shockwaves through both armies. For the Germans, it was hailed as an early triumph, a tangible sign that their strategy of pressuring the French into a war of attrition could begin to work. For the French, the loss was a stark warning that the assumptions underpinning their defensive strategy had failed. The evacuation of civilians and the rush to reinforce Verdun transformed the region into a chaotic theater of preparation, as troops were hurriedly deployed. Supplies scrambled, and command structures adjusted to meet the reality of the German advance. Every road, every hill, and every trench became a critical point of contention, as French forces sought to stabilize a front that had been unexpectedly breached. Yet even amid this early German success, the spirit of the defenders began to reveal itself. Colonel Mild Dryant and other officers rallied the remaining forces, organizing counterattacks and establishing improvised defensive positions wherever possible. The fortifications, though initially under-defended, became a focal point for French ingenuity and courage. Soldiers dug into the mud, turned shell craters into cover, and learned to use the terrain and the remnants of the fortifications to slow and disrupt the enemy advance. The early gains of the German forces, while significant, were soon tempered by the stubborn resistance of French troops who refused to allow the capture of Verdun to signal a collapse of the line. The fall of Douaumont also exposed the limitations of military planning, underestimating human resolve. What had seemed like a vulnerable stronghold became a rallying point for the defenders, demonstrating that even a partially prepared fortress could slow an enemy if met with determination, coordination, and improvisation. It highlighted the brutal interplay between strategy and circumstance, where meticulous planning collided with unpredictable human endurance, and where the fog of war could transform a tactical advantage into a prolonged struggle. By the time reinforcements arrived, the stage was set for the long, grinding battle that would come to define Verdun, not a swift conquest, but a drawn-out test of courage, endurance, and the unbreakable will of those defending their homeland. As the battle for Verdun dragged into its second week, the landscape itself seemed to conspire against the soldiers trapped in its relentless grasp, transforming the once verdant countryside into a nightmarish wasteland. The initial German artillery barrages had shattered the earth, turning fields and forests into a labyrinth of craters, torn-up trenches, and splintered trees, while smoke and dust mingled with the bitter scent of gunpowder to create a suffocating haze that hung over the battlefield like a permanent shroud. Men on both sides found themselves submerged in mud that clung to boots and uniforms, seeping into every crease and cut, slowing movement and sapping strength with every step. Shells fell incessantly, pounding the shattered terrain and the improvised fortifications, sending up clouds of earth and debris, and forcing soldiers to huddle in shallow dugouts or abandoned shelters, uncertain if they would survive the next impact. Amid this, disease spread with frightening speed, carried by the close quarters of trench life. Contaminated water, and the omnipresent stench of death that lingered in every shell hole. Soldiers went hungry for days at a time, rationed to the barest necessities, often scavenging what they could from the battlefield or from abandoned positions. While water became a precious commodity, each sip a calculated risk as enemy fire frequently targeted even the smallest sources. Corpses littered the landscape, many unburied for days, their presence a constant, grim reminder of mortality and the futility of their situation. The shock of seeing comrades fall under artillery fire or in sudden assaults left soldiers physically and mentally exhausted. Yet there was no time to grieve. The next barrage, the next attack, demanded immediate response and relentless endurance. Letters from the front capture these horrors with harrowing clarity. French soldier Hervé Lambert wrote of the trenches and mass graves where only a few from his squad remained alive, describing the overwhelming stench of decomposition and the impossibly deep craters that scarred the land. German soldiers, too, suffered as their nights were haunted by visions of death and destruction. The constant shelling and the eerie landscape of broken equipment and twisted bodies searing memories in two. Their minds. Even medical personnel struggled under impossible conditions, attending to the wounded amid collapsing shelters, smoke, and mud, often improvising care with whatever limited supplies were at hand, knowing that failure could mean the death of men who had already endured so much. Despite these unimaginable conditions, soldiers pressed on, driven by duty, fear, and the will to survive. The battle became not just a struggle against the enemy, but a relentless contest with the environment itself, where every step, every shot, and every decision was magnified by the suffocating pressure of constant danger and deprivation. Verdun became a symbol of the horrors of industrialized warfare, a place where human endurance was tested to its limits, and where the sheer scale of destruction demonstrated the terrifying efficiency of modern military technology. Amid blood and unyielding shellfire, the men of Verdun, French and German alike, experienced the war in its rawest, most unfiltered form, creating a legacy of courage, suffering, and resilience that would define the memory of this iconic battlefield for generations to come. As the early German momentum at Verdun began to meet stubborn resistance, the French command realized that conventional strategies would not suffice to hold the fortress against the relentless pressure. General Henri-Philippe Pétain, newly entrusted with the defense of Verdun, quickly assessed the dire situation and implemented measures that would transform the French response from desperate improvisation to organized resilience. Central to his strategy was the Noria rotation system, a method designed to prevent exhaustion and maintain morale by systematically cycling troops in and out of the front lines before they could be completely worn down. This approach not only preserved the fighting capability of the soldiers, but also fostered a sense of endurance and collective effort, creating a living, breathing network of defense that adapted to the horrors of trench warfare. Alongside the rotation system, Pétain prioritized the reinforcement of Verdun's defenses, ensuring that key positions, particularly the forts and high ground, were bolstered with additional troops, artillery, and logistical support. Roads and supply lines, previously vulnerable and under-maintained, were reconstructed and fortified, with the famous Voie Sacrée becoming a lifeline to ferry men, munitions, and provisions to the front. Engineers and laborers worked tirelessly under fire to keep this artery open, understanding that the survival of Verdun and the morale of the troops depended on a constant flow of resources. Every shell, every trench, every artillery emplacement was meticulously evaluated and reinforced, transforming the battlefield from a chaotic landscape of destruction into a coordinated defense network capable of withstanding sustained assaults. As the German attacks pressed on, French forces, benefiting from Pétain's strategic foresight, began to launch counterattacks that were carefully timed and meticulously planned. Infantry units, supported by improved artillery coordination, advanced with a precision that contrasted sharply with the earlier chaotic defenses, using small unit tactics that allowed them to reclaim key positions lost in the opening weeks. The artillery, once unable to suppress German fire effectively, now worked in concert with infantry movements, employing creeping barrages and counter-battery fire to neutralize enemy positions and support advancing troops. French soldiers became adept at exploiting the terrain and the remains of fortifications, turning craters, rubble, and shell-damaged forests into defensive assets and observation points, giving them a tactical edge against the enemy despite the continuing intensity of the bombardments. Through these measures, the tide at Verdun began to shift. German forces, initially confident in their rapid conquest, found themselves facing a French army that had not only stabilized the front but had also developed a dynamic system of defense that could absorb losses, rotate fatigued units, and strike back with coordinated precision. Positions once thought lost were gradually regained, the narrative of hopeless defense replaced by one of determined resilience. The combination of logistical ingenuity, tactical innovation, and careful management of manpower ensured that the French could endure the grinding attrition of the battle while inflicting equally punishing losses on the attackers. By the summer months, Verdun had become a testament to French tenacity, a symbol of disciplined endurance in the face of overwhelming adversity. Pétain's leadership and the systematic implementation of the Noria rotation system, along with reinforced defenses and evolving tactical practices, demonstrated how strategy, logistics, and human determination could converge to reclaim lost ground. The battle, once thought likely to yield quickly to German superiority, instead evolved into a prolonged struggle where the defenders regained not only physical positions but also moral and strategic advantage, reshaping the narrative of Verdun from one of imminent collapse to one of extraordinary resilience and unyielding national resolve. As the months of relentless combat stretched on at Verdun, the initial German optimism began to erode under the weight of harsh realities that even meticulous planning had failed to anticipate. Chief of General Staff Erich von Falkenhayn had conceived the offensive as a means to force France into collapse. But as the battle unfolded, the flaws in German strategy became increasingly evident. The original plan, intended as a swift capture of the Meuse Heights, had already devolved into a war of attrition, and without a clear, adaptable objective. The German forces were left grappling with a campaign that demanded more than they had prepared to give. Each gain made came at the cost of staggering casualties, while French reinforcements, rotation systems, and defensive ingenuity continually thwarted attempts to consolidate positions, leaving the Germans in a perpetual struggle to maintain momentum. One of the most critical deficiencies was the shortage of infantry relative to the scale of the operation. While artillery barrages could soften defenses and create temporary breakthroughs, holding and exploiting captured territory required more men than were available. German divisions, stretched thin and repeatedly rotated into the fire without sufficient reserves, faced exhaustion and plummeting morale, a stark contrast to the French troops benefiting from Petain's Noria system. The inability to commit enough troops to seize the heights in full allowed the French to retain commanding positions that could rain devastating artillery fire onto exposed German lines, turning early successes into strategic liabilities. Each attempt to advance became a perilous endeavor, where the landscape itself pockmarked by craters, and the debris of war amplified the challenges of movement, communication, and coordination under fire. Compounding these issues was a systematic overestimation of French losses. Reports from the front, influenced by wishful thinking and misinterpretation of the French rotation of units, painted a misleading picture of attritional success. German commanders believed they were inflicting crippling damage, imagining a French army weakened to the brink of collapse, while in reality, the defenders remained operationally capable and resilient. This disconnect between perception and reality led to repeated decisions to continue offensives under false assumptions, resulting in mounting casualties with diminishing returns. Each failed assault reinforced the futility of a plan that had long since diverged from its original intent. Yet high command persisted, driven by expectation, pride, and a stubborn belief in the possibility of ultimate victory. Further hampering the German effort was the lack of coordinated action with allies. Austro-Hungarian forces, preoccupied on other fronts and uninformed of the evolving dynamics at Verdun, were unable to provide meaningful support. Falkenhayn had neither planned for their involvement nor integrated them into his operations, leaving the German Fifth Army to face the fortified French positions largely alone. The absence of supplementary pressure on other fronts allowed France to concentrate resources, stabilize the line, and execute counterattacks with growing confidence. Every misstep in coordination, every delayed decision, and every misjudged estimate of enemy strength compounded the difficulties, creating a scenario in which early tactical gains could not translate into strategic success. By the summer, it became painfully clear that the initial German ambitions had faltered. Verdun, instead of falling swiftly as envisioned, had become a grinding testament to the limits of offensive warfare under industrial conditions. The combination of ambiguous objectives, insufficient infantry, misread enemy capabilities, and lack of Allied coordination culminated in a campaign that consumed lives, material, and morale without achieving its intended result. What had begun as a calculated strike to bleed France white ended in a costly stalemate, demonstrating the peril of underestimating both the human and logistical dimensions of modern warfare. and leaving Verdun as a stark symbol of the devastating consequences of overreach and flawed strategy. As the winter of 1916 drew to a close, the guns at Verdun fell silent, leaving behind a landscape scarred by 10 months of relentless combat, yet held firmly by the French defenders. The battle, which had begun as a German attempt to force France into submission, had evolved into a testament to human endurance and the unyielding spirit of a nation determined not to yield. Verdun became more than just a strategic point on a map. It emerged as a symbol of French national will, a place where courage, resilience, and determination overcame the seemingly insurmountable weight of industrialized warfare. The sheer scale of human suffering, the mud-choked trenches, the shattered forests, the craters filled with the remnants of lives lost stood as a sobering reminder of the human cost of attritional conflict. Each soldier, whether French or German, endured unimaginable conditions, and their sacrifices became woven into the very fabric of collective memory, shaping perceptions of duty, honor, and the heavy price of war. For the French, Verdun's defense became a rallying point, a story repeated in homes, newspapers, and schools as an example of national unity and perseverance. Pétain's leadership, the Nori rotation system, and the careful coordination of logistics and reinforcements demonstrated that even in the darkest hours, effective planning and steadfast commitment could withstand overwhelming odds. Soldiers' stories of enduring relentless shelling, scavenging for water amidst mud and corpses, and holding the line against repeated assaults, became emblematic of the resilience of ordinary men under extraordinary circumstances. These narratives informed not only military doctrine, but also the broader cultural understanding of what it meant to endure, resist, and survive under extreme adversity. At the same time, Verdun's legacy extended beyond France. For Germany, it served as a cautionary tale of overambition, flawed strategic planning, and the perils of underestimating one's opponent. The enormous casualties, the inability to achieve decisive objectives, and the mismanagement of resources illustrated the limits of attritional strategies and highlighted the critical importance of logistics, coordination, and realistic assessment in modern warfare. Military planners in subsequent conflicts studied Verdun to understand both the potential and the limits of prolonged engagements, while historians and writers explored the psychological and societal impacts of such battles, embedding Verdun deeply into the narrative of the First World War. Over the decades, Verdun also became a place of reconciliation and remembrance. Monuments, memorials, and cemeteries were established, honoring those who had fallen while fostering a spirit of reflection and international understanding. In the post-World War era, Verdun stood as a symbol of Franco-German reconciliation, demonstrating that even the most bitterly contested ground could become a site of healing, education, and shared memory. The battle's lessons about endurance, strategy, and the human cost of war resonate as strongly today as they did over a century ago, offering insights into both the horrors of conflict and the resilience of those who face it. Thank you so much for watching this deep dive into one of history's most grueling battles. If you found this story insightful and want to continue exploring the human experiences and strategic complexities of history, please make sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you do not miss any of our upcoming content. Verdun reminds us that history is not just about dates and maps, it is about the people who lived it, endured it, and shaped the world we know today.